is send a letter to the federal government or their insurance company saying we object on religious grounds. What happens then is the government comes in and they deal with their insurance company or their third party administrator if they're self-insured and say, okay, you've got to set up a separate segregated plan here. Well, what the religious groups contend is like, hey, that's still involving our, our kind of architecture here. I mean, you're basically what the shorthand for their argument is you're hijacking our insurance company, even though we don't have to pay for it, even though, we supposedly aren't condoning this coverage or offering it ourselves. Our insurance structure is doing it. So you're hijacking it. The government says, the U.S. government in arguments today says, no, we're not doing that. They are exempt. They don't have to have their fingerprints on this in every way, but we have an interest. The government has an interest in women being able to get their contraceptive coverage, dealing with their doctors, with their prescriptions as part of their other health insurance coverage. Just makes it easier. They call it seamless coverage. If you have a separate plan that women have to go buy, it just makes it so much harder on them that some of them won't get that done. And they'll suffer health consequences for it. You'll have, unintended pregnancies, et cetera. So here's a wrinkle in this time. It's a religious liberty case like Hobby Lobby was. Are you violating, are you putting a burden on these groups' religious freedom with this contraceptive language? Because of the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, you have a 4-4 tie in this court between liberals and conservatives.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Chris. What if we run into a deadlock? This could be one of the first times that we're starting to see, just 8 justices. What if it's 4-4?
It probably is going to be 4-4. That's Hobby Lobby was 5-4. This one's likely to be 4-4, I'd say. So what happens in that case, in any case where the court deadlocks, the federal appeals court decision is in effect. And in this case, almost every federal appeals court that heard this same type of case, including the 10th Circuit with the Little Sisters of the Poor and the 4 Oklahoma colleges, ruled against those organizations. They said the opting out, signing this form is not a burden on your religious beliefs. So there's a good possibility that the 10th Circuit and the other circuits around the country that ruled against the religious organizations, those decisions might go into effect. The other possibility is that the court will not announce that they're deadlocked. They'll just say, hey, we'll rehear this case when we have 9 justices.
Right.
That's a possibility.
We're chatting via Skype, live from Washington. There's lots of things going on at the Supreme Court. Earlier this week on Monday, the Supreme Court refused to allow Oklahoma and Nebraska to sue Colorado over its marijuana production and distribution laws. And there's a lot of layers to this as well, right, Chris?
There are, and it's interesting not to get too deep in the weeds, so to speak.
Wow, he'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry about that. This wasn't a case about, at least from Oklahoma's perspective, Nebraska's perspective, about Colorado allowing people to smoke pot. It was about the structure, the regulatory structure that went with Colorado's legalization effort, where they set up ways for the production of marijuana, the transportation, distribution, every aspect of getting marijuana from the ground through to a retailer to a consumer. They set up this entire structure for doing this. Well, the problem, to Oklahoma and Nebraska is that's against federal law to do that. It's one thing for Colorado voters to pass this, but you still have this federal law that applies to all 50 states regarding trafficking, large volume sales of pot, selling it. And that was the complaint of Oklahoma and Nebraska. And in one of their briefs, they said, hey, this is a $100 million drug enterprise in Colorado. If this were south of the border, we'd call it a drug cartel. And it's kind of hard to argue with that, just on a superficial level. So I really think what Oklahoma and Nebraska wanted here was some way to get into the Supreme Court with the argument about the Obama administration not enforcing federal law. And that is a fact. Basically, the Justice Department, after Colorado, legalized it and legalized this regulatory framework, said, we're just not going to enforce the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act there. So even the Colorado AG, she's also a Republican, and like Pruitt, is not inclined to like the president or the administration. But she has said the same thing. We need some kind of leadership from Washington on this, but you're not going to get it through this case.
Well, speaking of Republican leadership, we had a story that came out Saturday in the New York Times linking Tom Coburn to a specific office in Washington, D.C., which prompted you to pick up your cell phone and text said senator.
Right. The New York Times reported, and it was kind of this, the latest in the series of what, the Republicans, what are we going to do about Donald Trump stories. Basically said there was this effort among some conservatives to, if they can't stop him in the primary process, to recruit somebody to run as an independent in the fall, which is, I guess, kind of an odd strategy in itself. But apparently Tom Coburn, former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn, was among these people whose names had been mentioned as a possible candidate in the fall to run as an independent. Well, he's quoted in there basically talking about he'd do anything to stop Trump, which he has said before when he endorsed Marco Rubio, that he doesn't like Trump. And according to the New York Times story, he didn't rule out a run for the presidency. So yeah, it was Saturday night when I read this, and I texted him and just said, would you ever consider running for president? He one word answer, no. And I said, well, do you have time to talk? I wanted to ask you about the New York Times story, and he just texted back and said the Times is wrong. So, I kind of think that that's not something Tom Coburn would ever really want to do, is run for president. I don't think he'd want to put his family under the spotlight. He's 68 years old, and of course, as we all know, he left here fighting prostate cancer in early 2015. So I haven't talked to him about exactly where he is on that, but it just seems dubious at best that no matter how upset Coburn is with Donald Trump, that he would subject himself to a campaign.
Got to admit, I was a little bit surprised to read that story as well. The New York Times story was interesting because right off the top, he said he wasn't interested, and then the story kind of circled around. Your story was a little more specific on what we think the senator may be thinking. Last night, more primaries and caucuses. We saw Trump and Clinton win big in Arizona. We saw Sanders pick up a couple states, Cruz pick up a state. But the thing that came to mind was this bizarre Twitter exchange between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz about their wives.
I guess we shouldn't be shocked at anything anymore, and we all still act it. But right, and the Donald Trump started it, I guess, with the tweet about the Cruz campaign using a picture of his wife in an ad, and then saying, just wait till, I spill the beans on your wife.
Spill the beans. That's a pretty good slogan right there. We're going to spill the beans on Ted Cruz's wife. What is going on here?
Yeah, and then, shortly thereafter, Cruz responded by saying, that bringing my wife into it just shows, how classless you are. He said they didn't have anything to do with the picture of Trump's wife. So, I don't know. Every week do we say that this has kind of hit a new low? After protesters are getting beaten up, or there's some comparison to David Duke, or you just kind of feel like you're past trying to find a new low for it.
One last thing before we let you go is kind of our week in politics here with Chris Castile Skyping live from Washington, D.C. The incident in Brussels yesterday. Early thoughts on how this could shape perhaps what we see over the next couple months in the race for president?
I think it's unfortunate, but I think these things get forgotten fairly quickly. We thought after Paris in November, God, this race is all about national security, foreign policy. That, from now on, that's all we're going to talk about, really. And that was true for the first few weeks after Paris, but and San Bernardino. I'm sorry, but it's ultimately a race is not going to be about one thing. And people in different states, people in different regions, people in different income stratas have their own concerns. So, I mean, I think there'll be a lot more talk about it for a while, but it's not like the candidates on both sides haven't talked for months and months and months about how to get rid of ISIS. And I think that, there's nothing peculiar about what happened yesterday that really changes positions on ISIS. I mean, I think everybody just maybe kind of reemphasizes the need to take care of it.
Well, I lied. I said that was going to be my last question to you, Chris, but I want to follow up on something we talked about last week, which is Judge Merrick Garland and whether that he's going to get any traction. Hearing any more about that?
I'd be shocked if anything changes about that, Dave. I mean, I know that there are a few Republican senators who are getting a lot of heat back home, who think that they should at least give him a hearing. But even and that step, I don't even think that step happens. But even if that were to happen, that doesn't get his nomination out of the committee into the Senate floor, and it doesn't mean a vote on him. I think maybe what the most newsy thing about it is I believe Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Kentucky Republican, said over the weekend on the news shows that he would not ask for a vote in December after the elections. He won't ask for a late November, early December vote on Merrick Garland if Hillary Clinton were to win.
Very good. There you have it, a very concise 10-15 minute look at what's going on in Washington and with the Supreme Court this week, and lots going on there. Chris, as always, we appreciate the insight.
Glad to do it, Dave.
And also glad to see the train system is running again in Washington, D.C., but I'm sure, Chris, you're more happy than I am about that.
Yeah, it's helpful.
All right, more political coverage can be found online at newsok.com, and follow Chris as well in the Oklahoman.